The Holy Gospel according to Mathew, the 5th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him.
Y abriendo su boca las enseñaba, diciendo,
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Bienaventurados los que lloran, porque ellos recibirán consolación.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
Bienaventurados los que tienen hambre y sed de justicia, porque ellos serán saciados.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy.
Bienaventurados los de limpio corazón, porque ellos verán a Dios.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Bienaventurados los que padecen persecución por causa de la justicia, porque de ellos es el reino de los cielos.
Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account.
Gozaos y alegraos, porque vuestro galardón es grande en los cielos, porque así persiguieron a los profetas que fueron antes de vosotros. El Evangelio del Señor.
Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. It's interesting to think about the questions that accompany different stages of our lives. When you're a little kid, you get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mine was always Captain America, but you know. As you approach the end of high school, you start getting asked what you're going to do after you graduate. Later on, it becomes, when are you going to get married? Then it's, when are you going to give me a grandchild? Then it's, when are you going to have another child? Then it's going to be, really, you're having another child? I've hit a new stage in life where I now get a very interesting question, not all the time, but every once in a while. The question goes like this: are your parents still living? Anyone's ever got that before? It's kind of an odd one, isn't it? By the way, they are still alive and kicking. They're probably watching this. I'm going to get a phone call later on. But it is an interesting question. It bears witness to the fact that as we get older, the reality is that grief is something that accompanies us more and more. Perhaps as a little kid, we lose a great-grandparent or something like that, and we don't fully understand. But as we keep working our way through life, we amass this collection of grief. And it's interesting how grief works, because you don't just get through it in 1 year. It's something that accompanies us throughout life, and the oddest things can bring us back to our moments of grief. For me, one of mine is the smell of spaghetti noodles cooking in chicken broth. My grandmother, Juju, was not a particularly good cook. The only thing she really knew how to do was to throw a couple chicken breasts in a pot of water and boil them, and towards the end add a handful of noodles. And that was what we ate. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? The only thing, though, is for 5-year-old Jonathan, that tasted amazing. And so now when I smell chicken broth on a stove warming, I think of my grandmother, Juju. By the way, the Juju came from the fact that she thought she was too young to be a grandmother, and I was supposed to call her Julia, her name, but learning to talk, that came out as Juju, and it stuck. So that's how it works. The longer we live, the more grief we get. And I've always thought about the way Dietrich Bonhoeffer that is, talks about grief. He says, when you lose someone, when someone dies, it's like a unique hole is torn in your soul. And nothing can ever fill that hole because that person was truly unique. There never has been, nor will there be anyone like the person you had to say goodbye to. Instead, Jesus places himself there to remind you that in Jesus, you are connected to the one you had to say goodbye to. It's interesting. I like this Revelation text, and it's not just because I did a Bible study on Revelation. This scene that we got in today's reading pulls back the curtain, if you will. In the midst of our griefs and our challenges and everything that weighs us down, Jesus shows us a scene, an image to provide us comfort. The interesting thing about the book of Revelation is it's really hard to nail down when things are happening in that book. So the scene of the heavenly worship of a great multitude that no one can count, is that happening in the past? Is that happening now? Is that to come? Well, the answer is yes. It's all of those. It's happening now, it happened in the past, and it will continue to happen. You get this scene of a great multitude from all tribes and nations, all peoples, all languages, robed in white, the baptismal garment, reminding us that we are named and claimed by Jesus. And as such, we are all gathered around the throne, singing praise to God. And the most profound way that happens in our life together is in communion. Pastor Christina described Dia de los Muertos as a thin place where the there and the here collide. And we can sense the presence of the divine and of one another in truly remarkable ways. As a pastor, I give communion to people, and I know when they have griefs and losses in their life, and it becomes most profound at the communion rail. People tell me not only can they feel Jesus there, they can feel their loved one. Incredible things happen when we join together with God's people, that great multitude in Revelation around the throne, as well as this great multitude gathered here. Where together we are all one in a way that's hard to explain. But I'd like to tell you at least one experience that I had with it. I'd like to tell you about my friend Meg. I was in Meg's wedding. She was only a few years older than me. And she married her high school sweetheart, Bubba. Great name, isn't it? After a few years of marriage, she rolled over one morning to wake up to find that Bubba had died in his sleep. And for months after that, when she would come to worship on Sunday morning, her mother would say that she would weep as she took communion and returned to her pew, because she could feel that thin place there. I was home on Christmas Eve from seminary, and when you're a seminarian and you come home for Christmas Eve, they put you to work. And so I was giving out communion on one side of the church while the pastor was covering the other side of the church. I happened to have Meg's side. When Meg came up, she was sobbing once again. And as I gave her communion, I just grabbed her hand and gave it a squeeze just for a moment. After she returned to her pew, I was almost inconsolable. I had to summon all of my baby pastor powers to not break down in tears myself for the rest of the service. I was overcome with a grief that I had never known before. What I didn't find out was a couple months later, my mom and Meg's mom were talking, and Meg's mom said, "I don't know what happened to Meg on Christmas Eve, but she came back and she didn't sob. She had a peace I haven't seen since before Bubba died." Now, I think what happened there is that in communion, connected to Jesus and to Bubba and to one another, I think God gave Meg some of the peace I had, and God let me carry some of the grief that Meg had. What we do here at church matters. It connects us to one another, to those who have gone before, and to God. When you gather for communion in a little bit, I want you to keep that scene of the heavenly throne room in your mind. As you go to take communion, I want you to imagine the ceiling lifted off this place, the walls laid down. Instead of just being right here in this place, we are gathered as part of that great multitude of all peoples, nations, and tribes, gathered around Jesus. And I want you to take comfort that we are all united in our baptismal identity with Jesus, the Lamb on the throne. Amen.